Hello, my name is Marla Cortez. This is for my History 264 Latin American Nations class. This is the podcast version of the midterm essay, and I apologize in advance for any background noises if there are any. But basically, I kind of tackled this midterm through a lens that kind of starts like looking at the bigger picture, which is through like revolutions and what a revolution is, while also delving into change in Latin America and how oftentimes to change and to be changed can kind of be interchangeable when it comes to like discussions and dialogue, but in many cases, as we see and as I will talk about in Latin America, change was kind of thrust upon some people and initiated by others, and I think that's a really central component to re-envisioning and recreating nations in Latin America during the 19th to 21st centuries. But yeah, I kind of just highlight how there's a mold within these nations and how through gender identity, through class, political influences, etc., there's a re-envisioning and recreating, but that comes at a cost, of course. And um, I feel like there's a lot of repetitiveness, but it's repetitiveness that's we can see patterns throughout history in different cases all throughout Latin America, and even looking at just that highlights the importance of storytelling and the value of looking at both sides of the coins and trying to combat the interchangeableness of what a change means, basically. Um, I use a lot of sources. I took me a while to finish the essay just because I had a lot of words on there and had to kind of tone it down. I feel like I was kind of going off on tangents, but I guess that's the beauty of this podcast part. Although hopefully it's not too long. I can't see the time. But anyways, I kind of just start by discussing what, of course, revolutions mean in terms of the class, and I look at the What is a Revolution podcast and also the Appendix 1, the Coming Full Circle, and how kind of a revolution just highlights sudden radical change, overthrowing the old regime, sorry, and also looking at revolutions through the lens of great revolutions, of social revolutions, and political revolutions, and kind of just using that as a pedestal to try and help us understand what nations went through in Latin America and how these definitions help us kind of look at the bigger picture while also being able to delve deeper into some of the smaller characteristics of revolutions. And I also try to um, make a point of saying that definitions are good, such as the one that Mike Duncan highlights for us, but also, they can have some effects as to what is being discussed, who is being discussed, and who is not, and what is not being discussed. Um, but moving on from the discussion of revolution, I kind of just tried to incorporate it in through the lens of storytelling and just kind of introducing different perspectives and like highlighting how these different events in different places at different times kind of all come together to make this great excuse me, sorry, to create this overall understanding of revolution. So I look at, Brazil, the slave rebellion in Brazil in 1835. I look at the Haitian Revolution. I look at the Mexican Revolution. I include gender, class, race, etc., and kind of just try to bring it all together while trying to thoroughly discuss each and every one of them. Um, and so, for example, for Brazil, um, excuse me if I say this person's name wrong, João José Ruiz kind of examines the layers of the different identities in the slave rebellion in Brazil, and he kind of just shares how, although it was not a successful revolution, the Muslim Africans in Bahia in the 19th century were one of the most effective urban slave rebellions like to occur on the American continent. And I really like that he kind of like we often just like as Duncan talks about, we kind of just use these words as words, but I like how Jose Reis um kind of places it on the lens of like modern day by saying by comparing and contrasting basically like if we looked at that slave rebellion from 1835 in Brazil, if we looked at it today, it would be over 1.5 million inhabitants and a censusing of over 12,000 people. I feel like this is a really thorough comprehension because it kind of just shows the complexity of trying to understand this moment in time and how it reveals like similar characteristics to what defines a revolution and how it just introduces the aspects of what makes a great revolution. And also, it's important to kind of look at the contributions of what stories are being told by who and how this reading kind of introduces us to different point of views or perspectives from like Islam and African backgrounds. And also like understanding that changing, whether by choice or not, tells a difference. There's a difference in storytelling when it comes to that. And also looking at, excuse me, sorry. Just like I included this outside source called an act even of public security, slave resistance, social tensions, and the end of international slave trade. I felt this was really important because although the slave rebellion in Brazil was not successful, their constant actions of rebellion and just fighting for freedom implemented into the government of Brazil, the end of international slave trade, which just goes to show how important these perspectives are to recognize and how, just touching that even though something fails, it doesn't exactly mean that it fails. There's still those influences on security and policy, and that is seen in that event, even of public security journal that I included in my paper. And I'm just gonna read one of the quotes because I liked it. So it goes, one major problem was that African slaves had a proclivity to rebel. In Bahia, more than 20 rural and urban slave revolts between 1807 and 1835 left slave owners distraught. Social instability. By the 1830s, there was social instability caused by economic depression, provincial revolts, slave revolts and violence, etc., etc. And it's just kind of, emphasizing the undeniable intermingling of different factors that shape like different social and political structures in Latin America. And you can once again kind of just see how the definitions that Duncan uses of revolutions are deeply embedded in this. And then, also looking at how influential the Haitian Revolution was, it highlighted the critical difference in structures between enslaved Black people and whites, and also connected to Latin America, and how Haiti and the Haitian aid were critical to Bolivar in the South American independence for Spain, and also how, apologize again if I'm saying this wrong, Laurent Du Bois delves into the Haitian Revolution and the adventures in in New World, and kind of just examines the different people involved and how the creation or the leading up to freedom and liberty enslaved people of Haiti kind of worked, and how successful it was, which is really important. Um, yes, and then I also really think something really important about this part is that how important the different cultures and beliefs like help to build up the social structures that were embedded in the success of the Haitian Revolution, and how there was a bounding of community that I feel like was pivotal and super important in that success story, I guess you could say. And not saying that not saying that because something fails doesn't mean there wasn't that bound of community, but just including that, like, how would I say, it's like bringing to life or just putting that, that little personal, empathetic, sympathetic approach kind of just shows that, like, this is history, but at the end of the day, these were people just like me and others that were just going through life. And I can only imagine what it was to experience such a long revolution as the Haitian Revolution. Um, and just continuing on with that, we look at the extensiveness of the impacts, even all the way until today. I included a quote from a reading about the impact of the Haitian Revolution and how Frederick Douglass, uses the Haitian Revolution as an example to show that like abolition of slavery is like something that happened in history, but it's also a possibility, shows that there's a possibility of liberation for people today. Obviously, not literal slavery in some aspects, but just viewing it through that lens, there's that structure change and fight for as tools of abolition and freedom, basically. And kind of moving on from the bigger picture of revolutions, I guess you could say, which was the examples provided. I delve a little more in on like different viewpoints and characteristics like gender and class, and how these components of revolution played a role basically in the 19th to 21st centuries in Latin America and the re-envisioning and creating of nations. And so I look at liberalism in the bedroom, quarreling spouses in 19th century Lima, and how the role of women and the assignments placed upon them during this period were a way for women to them like to redefine themselves basically and kind of use the negative, for lack of a better word, aspects placed upon them by like men and social structures. They use that like as a tool basically. So um, like you might talk down on me, but I'm going to use those same exact words to fight for what I feel is right, basically. And of course, this was limited because they were not really seen as women, more as the under the lens of like motherhood and wives. But this kind of introduced that implementation of power and just giving women that voice to claim space and use that sense of morality and responsibility to help make arguments that, a few years ago, a few years back, at least in this time, point of time in this reading, was kind of impossible in a way. And you kind of just have this new perspective, like the court recordings and proceedings that, as it says in the reading, gaining judges' ears. So, like social standards, although they shifted lightly and ever so slightly, there's still that shift, which is super important to the basis of femininity and the bigger picture of structures placed upon society. And nevertheless, it created a voice for women and social progress. And continuing on from that, I'm so sorry if this is long. Um, as women began to take up space in Lima, Peru, which is from the reading of liberalism and bedroom, we see women in other parts of Latin America infiltrating space through revolutions and physical spaces. And then there's that lack of recognition in the telling of this history in the story, which is seen in Sex and Revolution, Gender Politics and Power in Modern Mexico. Carlos Monsiváis touches on women in the Mexican Revolution and how structural and important, like how impactful gender was at this time, and basically how the same way that the Mexican Revolution is like the discussion of Mexican Revolution is unified into a whole, which diminishes basically like the complexity of it. This is because of that patriarchal standard that these people set into place. And it's these ideologies that attempt to understand like it's the ideologies that attempt to, make it easier for us to understand that also create these gaps in history. And so it kind of connects back to Duncan and how he tries to understand revolutions through, breaking it down into three different kinds of revolutions. And yes, that is super helpful and it's something that I argue as helpful in the paper, but it's also something to acknowledge that creates gaps in histories because of the patriarchal standards, the social structures, economics and whatnot. And then the attempt of placing Mexican Revolution in a box, and then like also the machismo with the history, and like placing women on the back burners, basically, just kind of I don't know if this is the right word, but like disassociates women from the fight and the overall cause. And I think it's important to highlight the struggles of women attempting to take up spaces because of forces like masculinity and machismo. Um, but yes, I feel like what's super important is just creating that discussions on the struggles of power and how women try to fight against this thing that is just in the way, this patriarchy, and how just the less points of view we get, the more one-sided history becomes, and that in itself impacts how we understand revolutions. Um, I feel like I'm talking a lot, so I'm going to try to move on. And then later on in the oh no. Later on in the class, I kind of talk about I'll end this with the era of Trujillo basically and kind of just continuing on with the acknowledgement in the many ways of which Latin America had experienced changes, whether those changes were by choice or not for some. Obviously, for the ruling of Trujillo, it was definitely by choice, but the people experiencing the horrors of the era of Trujillo were obviously it was thrust upon them. But yeah, the ruling of the Dominican Republic by Rafael Trujillo kind of just shows even more the complexities of structure during this time period and just overall in Latin America and how and how Trujillo kind of embarked on a journey that praised totalitarianism and took advantage of people. And like, obviously, it takes two to tango. Sorry for so many like metaphors, but it kind of just shows that Trujillo found his way in through the people, and his extremities were influential to his long-standing regime. And so, just to share a quote on the Dictator, Seduction, Politics, and the Popular Imagination, the Era Trujillo by Lauren Derby. She shares Trujillo established a predatory regime with combined bosses and extensive graft, with an ideology of developmentalism and national progress. There was the implicit logic was that Trujillo represented the very embodiment of the nation, and his personal enrichment somehow aggrandized the republic. And basically, it's saying that Trujillo was, I guess you can say, tricky because everything he did was for himself, but he made it seem like it was for his pueblo. And anytime something was given to the pueblo, it was like the biggest praise in the world. And there is no effective distinction between knowing what was, a part of the dictator's own purse and a part of the overall economic structure of the Dominican Republic at this time. And kind of just understanding this structure and this control that Trujillo placed upon people allows us to go into a deeper dive of the complexities of society as a whole. We can take this era of Trujillo and see how it's kind of implemented, how you can see the similarities in previous mentioned revolutions, such as the Haitian Revolution. And it was just it's kind of that discussion of power and control, like he tried to step in and save people from a dire situation, but this dire situation turned into much more. And basically, the people of Dominican Republic had to tiptoe everywhere they went because of Trujillo's regime, and how if you even tried to go against it, you're going to be faced by the horrors of violence that were placed by Trujillo and his people, or his military and his army. And I feel like once again connecting this back to change and how change that was brought on by this regime is very important to recognize because it reveals two sides. There was the people that were creating the change and the ones facing the repercussions of changes. And you can kind of see that in the film of In the Time of the Butterflies, which I really enjoyed, by the way. It just shows, the pivotal importance of the Maribal sisters and the resistance against Trujillismo and how they re-envisioned and recreated a nation secretively because of Trujillo's ways and manners, which is violence basically and murder. Um, but yes, they were there to attempt for the attempt of freedom for their people. And there was three out of four citizens that died at the hands of Trujillo, but I just feel like they show that two sides of the coin. Which could be one coin, but there's two sides and they can be very differently, basically. And their goal was to provide that change, to provide that choice, and create a constructive and hopeful world. Um, and yeah, they re-envisioned and recreated nations and just implemented a new idea of living for the people in the Dominican Republic at this time. But um, probably went off on a few tangents, but I kind of just want to keep connecting it back to that change is inevitable, and that's obviously very prevalent here and very obvious. But for Latin American nations and the people, it happened in many different ways with many different influences. And the one thing that is for sure is that these changes, whether good or bad, place an understanding of what re-envisioning and recreation they wanted for themselves as a nation. And navigating revolutionary changes in the modes of revolutions allows us to examine history through a lens that takes more into consideration just than, one perspective or a Western point of view. But yes, basically it offers a discourse that um, includes new perspectives and understandings rather than limiting ourselves. But yes, thank you. I hope you enjoyed that. Sorry if it was long.